Time to lose some subscribers. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today I am taking a look at the 2018 movie In Fabric. Now, I gotta say, typically what I'll do is I'll watch a film and I'll think about it for a little while. No real set determined amount of time, just enough time that I think is reasonable to kind of be introspective, let it rattle around for a bit, and kind of figure out the tone of the review that I'm going to be doing. And then I have a notes template file that I kind of draft up. It allows me to bullet point some things that, some beats that I might want to hit, but allows me to still kind of free form these videos as well. And with this one, I have no notes on it. And that's not necessarily because there's nothing in particular, that I want to touch on. It's more that what I was feeling about this one requires a little bit more of a free form flow of ideas. And that's what I'm going to be providing right now. So it may be a little bit fractured. You may notice some edits in this, quite a few edits in this, such as that one there. So this was a movie that was directed by Peter Strickland. And if you don't know who that is, you might recognize one of his more popular movies, Berberian Sound Studio, which I had watched a few years ago, and I'll keep my opinions on that one to myself for right now. Eventually, maybe I'll rewatch that and give it a rotted review. But what I will say is, watching In Fabric, I did not realize who directed it while I was watching it up until about halfway through. And I pulled out my phone and decided to look up the movie a bit. And all of a sudden, I saw his name. I saw, Berberian Sound Studio, and all of a sudden, everything started to click and make sense. From a 10-mile overview, what this movie is about is a haunted dress that basically goes through two sets of people that have tragedies befall them upon acquiring the dress. But that really doesn't do justice to touch upon what this movie is really trying to convey. It uses very odd visual tones and styles. You get the sense that it was taking like Berberian Sound Studio, taking a large amount of inspiration from the Italian giallo slashers and horror films and that kind of thing. But it takes the abstract nature of those with the visuals and the soundtrack and just ramps them up to the nth degree in a way that seems to be Peter Strickland's style. And every director has their own style. I can sit down and, if it's if I don't know who's directing it, but I sit down and I start watching a Joe Dante movie or a Quentin Tarantino movie, a little bit easier there. You instantly can tell, oh, that's, this was obviously a, Tarantino movie. Just by the visual cues and visual style and so on, the directorial choices that were made. And Peter Strickland's, I can honestly say, having watched two of his films now, is just not for me. And that was kind of the tone that I was initially wanting to bring to the table with my review. I kind of wanted to give some room for benevolence and, peace on earth and so on. And just say that, with all the visual stuff that was going on in this movie, the abstract, oddball things, that it just wasn't for me. Maybe it would be for you. Maybe you'd like it and so on and so forth. And I know I've said that about a few movies on here before. But I'm changing that up a bit. And I'm going to approach it a little bit harsher. I typically try to be a little bit more, see things from all points of view and respect other opinions and so on and so forth. And that's not to say that I'm going to deviate from that, but I am going to allow myself to be a little bit more harshly, honestly opinionated on this one. There was a time in my life in which, when I was, 16 or so, I was watching, art films. And I was getting exposed to indie movies and art films and so on. And I was born and raised in San Diego, and we had the Landmark Cinemas over there. I don't know exactly how far that chain spreads, but if you wanted to see Jurassic Park, you just go to any old theater. But if you wanted to see Box of Moonlight or a reprint of Charlie Chaplin's The Bicycle Thief, you would go to a Landmark movie theater. And that was where I was spending my the chief amount of my movie watching experience growing up. In that time was going to see indie and art films in Landmark theaters. And I got to a stage where I probably, I look back on myself, and there are movies that I watched there that I really still appreciate to this day. Box of Moonlight definitely being one of them. But there were some that I kind of look back and I look at how much I fawned over them, just because I think it was kind of the high class thing to do, when in fact they were just a bit crap. And being a teenager in high school and so on, that was kind of exposing myself to this. There was definitely an element of the weirder, the better, and not just, the better for the weirdness sake, but the perception of the high class of the art of film. The weirder it was, the more it achieved that lofty goal. And over time, I've, grown, I've exposed myself to more movies, I've matured, and I recognize what Peter Strickland was going for. I recognize the Giallo kind of influenced style. I recognize a lot of what he might have been going for with the visual aesthetic and the emotional storytelling through that visual aesthetic. And having recognized that and looking at it in its entirety, what I can say, from my opinion, is that this is pretentious pap. And I don't say that lightly. It's just difficult for me to come away with it from any other opinion. And again, this is just mine. I'll throw out my big old asterisk there. This is just my opinion. If yours differs, then that's perfectly fine. Differing opinions make the world go round. It makes us unique, different people. But with my channel and delivering my opinion to the camera here, I assume that the people that watch this channel on the regular do it because, at the very least, I proffer an honest opinion, even if it's one you don't technically agree with. But in my opinion, this was just nothing more than vapid, pretentious pap. Something that my teenage self would have lauded over and tried to show to all my friends and talk about how great this movie was and so on. And at this point, I just kind of cut through it. There are many ways to tell a story, and you're probably tired of hearing me say movies are a visual storytelling medium, but chief among that is the storytelling portion of that. And I am very used to movies that attempt to tell a story and deliver an emotional impact with its audience through the use of visual style cue, as opposed to a traditional narrative storyline. I think that, either way can really have a large emotional impact. The methodology of using visual style over screenwriting substance is the harder one to pull off. And I think ultimately what it kind of comes down to is finding the balance between the two. Ultimately it does have to kind of come down to a dance between having a coherent, character-driven script and having the abstract, oddball visuals. And if that's all you have in your movie, then you better be a filmmaking genius for that to come across in a way that you don't feel like your hour and a half was spent wasted. Lars von Trier's Antichrist, I think, is a great example of a movie that played both of them very well. Is it a normal film? Absolutely not. Is it sick and twisted? Absolutely. Is it a movie that I would show to just any old friend of mine? No way. But it has characters that have good dialogue and good interaction and a coherent kind of plot and conflict of what they're trying to achieve. But it also has those really oddball, abstract visual elements to it. The fox that is found and, speaks, chaos reigns, the roots of the tree and the bodies and so on, and everything else that was in that movie. But it did deliver its emotional impact with a sledgehammer. Just because it did find that balance well. It didn't overdo one and sacrifice the other. And in this case, in the movie In Fabric, it absolutely overdid the visual style. in sacrifice of any kind of narrative, in sacrifice of any kind of coherent storyline, and in sacrifice of the movie itself. And what I walked away with was a movie that the teenage me would have loved, mostly because of my misconception between the weirder the better and the artistic emotional connection. I would have watched a scene that was in this movie of a voyeuristic three-way between two girls, a mannequin, and ultimately a guy watching them, in which the mannequin has a merkin and at the end menstruates. I would have seen that and thought how brilliant that was, but now I look at that and I say, well, what are you trying to convey to me? What in the visual storytelling narrative, in the storytelling portion of this, and the emotion you're trying to deliver to me, are you trying to say with this? And ultimately what I came across with was somebody that was had a large vocabulary saying nothing. It was pretentious pap, and I couldn't get beyond that. I'm going to go ahead and throw up the scores here. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And as you can see here, I didn't give the plot a whole lot, mostly because there wasn't a whole lot of plot to be had. The intent, I gave a big old goose egg. Whatever it was trying to achieve through the screen, it failed. I think it was trying for this lofty goal of having this emotional punch to it, and it didn't. I was bored, mostly. I was bored watching weird stuff happen. And for me, that's not a quality movie experience. Not anymore. The acting I actually thought was quite good, but it's a bit of a balancing act here, because while some of the performances were very, very good in what you might want to call the normal characters, just the characters that were having real dialogue with one another, even if they were kind of troubled, they were still felt real, and they were performed very well. And then you had the directorial choices of weird, abstract characters that, the sales lady at the department store that sold the dress, the cryptic philosophy, that she spoke, every line. And there were a lot of lines. It was just a weird choice, and that wasn't so much the performance as it was the direction, but even so, I kind of felt like it wasn't delivered terribly well. Just weighing everything, the score kind of wound up in a place of slightly above average. And that same goes with the technical. I recognize the aesthetic and the camera work and the editing work that had to go into making this aesthetic come to the screen in a way that told the story that it was trying to, and the technical prowess that might take. Even if I thought it failed on an intention level and it didn't serve any kind of plot narrative, I still recognize the technical abilities that made that happen. And again, weighing everything, came up with a place of slightly above average. And so that ultimately gets us a score of 37 out of 100 points. This was not my favorite movie in the world. I honestly would just really not recommend it. The only way that I would recommend watching this again is in the company of friends that might be herbally enhanced. In that case, that might actually kind of be a bit of a fun watch. But as it stands, sober, not so much. Not even weird for the sake of weird. It did not deliver whatever it was trying to in terms of making me feel what it wanted me to feel and delivering the story that it wanted to tell. So that's my review of 2018's In Fabric. I really thank you for joining me here today. It really does mean a lot to me. I do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you like these videos, please click like and subscribe. And if you want to support me further, my Patreon link is below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.